In July 2005, 25 Tlingit, Haida and Tsimshian elders gathered in Juneau, Alaska to speak and listen and meet with one another, to tell stories about their lives, their clans, their nations, and their land. Stories about embracing family and community wellness. The year before, these same elders had met to agree upon a common set of traditional tribal values. Those values were then taken to the 69th Annual Delegates Assembly of the tribe and unanimously adopted. They are as follows: discipline and obedience to the traditions of our ancestors, respect for self, elders, and others, respect for nature and property, patience. Pride in family, clan, and traditions is found in love, loyalty, and generosity. Be strong in mind, body, and spirit. Humor. Hold each other up. Listen well and with respect. Speak with care. We are stewards of the air, land, and sea. Reverence for our Creator. Live in peace and harmony. Be strong and have courage. These are the stories they told.
My given name at birth in the Tlingit way is Jade Gay. It's named after my grandmother, and we all know we're matrilineal. So my mother was full Tlingit, but my father was full Tsimshian. So that we all knew we followed on the mother's side in our family, and we all grew up with Tlingit names. My grandmother, and then my brothers from my grandmother's brothers. But I was raised in Metlakatla with my father's people, so I got a wealth of upbringing amongst the Tsimshian people. One of the things I think I appreciated the most, never realized what the wealth of the talents were in Metlakatla until I left there. The Tsimshian people are probably the most musical, is what I feel. You can go to any function, even now, and somebody can get up at a drop of a hat just to sing. They have one of the best choirs, I feel. Arnold's was certainly one in the choir. And I had strong background in music, so I played piano almost all my life, which went on to Sheldon Jackson. My father died when I was 9 years old, but I still have vivid memories of he was so gifted as a storyteller. And some of the elders, and David Lee Sr. is one in particular, had said that he was probably one of the best storytellers. Of course, we didn't know because he was a father. But after dinner, especially in the winter, it was at least a custom in our family. We always had, and I don't remember how he gathered us, but we'd sit around the stove and he'd start telling stories. And we'd always have some of our native foods like soap berries or jarred berries. And that just became part of a ritual. And I'm sure all the families did this. My father and mother were very strong in health care. I know the Devil's Club was certainly one of the most used. when winter was coming on, my father's sisters would bring us, and Arnold probably knows, I think it's some kind of a root. They tied around our neck, and then my aunts would bring flannel vests for all of us, rub us down every night with camphorated oil, which wasn't the Indian medicine becoming modern now. And really careful, mainly at the time of the severity of epidemics, and TB being the worst. And my mother was just super, super careful with us on who we visited or because at that time there were no hospitals or sanitariums to send them. And if they did send them, like say to Cushman Hospital in Tacoma, Washington, or to Skagway, these hospitals were full. So the territory would teach the families how to care for the patient at home. And we had quite a few just in the neighborhood around us with whole families with tuberculosis. And my mother was so careful with us, and the school was careful, that I said, well, even with all the tuberculosis around us, I've always had a negative tying, and you could just give that the values of how they cared for their families. I think in our talking, we weren't sure which direction to go, and I said the emphasis was on wellness. So I asked, now, what are we being healed from? We're becoming well, we want to be well, but what has been the problems? It's not only things like the epidemics, but the disruption in our family life from the time the traders first came in. And we could look back and say, why has there been so much alcoholism over the years? And we've all suffered. I've had it in my family, and it just carries on from generation to generation, from the traders. The disruption in our language and our culture, being punished for speaking our language. I don't speak either language because my parents both believed that we would never progress in the Western culture unless we spoke English. And I think over the years later, I think there was, wished, even my children would say to my mother, why didn't you teach us Tlingit? And matrilineally, my mother, even though it was matrilineal, she was a real matriarch, as Ellen and even Stan and Arnold would know. She was the authority. And I think she became more so being widowed with 3 small children, and I was the oldest of the 3. They wanted the authorities in the community at that time. Orphanages were all over the country here, and they said you'll just have to bundle up your 3 children and send them to Haynes. And she said, no one's going to take my children. And I think the reason for her strength is how her life was disrupted in having to lose her mother at such a young age and trying to help raise the younger, and being taken away to like Juneau, Oregon. So she talked very little bit on the trials and tribulations of those years, but I think she made a real point. She'd say, I don't know what happened to you children if I died first, because she felt the mother was the strength in the family. Stan, did you?
Yes, I'd like to comment on my parents knew their family really well. We used to we're the only families who used to subsist off the land. Her family, my family, and half a dozen other families. And my dad and his dad were really good friends. And excuse me if I'm interrupting or anything like that, but her mother was always outstanding. And I asked Mom, how come she's so nice? And she said, she's a princess. She was brought and raised up that way. That's why she was so strong in her character. She was raised to respect other people like this. That's part of her family, what I knew of her.
So Stan and I are about the same age. I don't recall if we were classmates, but we're about the same age. Arnold was my older brother's age, and they were all in World War II together. And I think the strength in Metlakatla in particular, because I grew up in a little village, is the support, whether it's birth or death or happiness or whatever. And in addition to the strength and support was humor. I didn't speak the language. My mother taught herself to understand Tsimshian. She didn't speak it. But when we'd go to functions like at the church or at the town hall, and they would be just roaring, laughing, and I'd say, well, what did they say? And Arnold would be just a perfect one to tell these stories and, repeat of our elders. And they were, when they say it takes a village to raise a child, that was so true. It wouldn't, neighbors or whomever would never hesitate to report to my mother. And we got punished or whatever they said. Josephine said, or Marjorie said, So I think we're a challenge. I grew up with 5 boys, and I was right in between all the boys, 3 older and 2 younger. It seemed like I was always too young for the older and too old for the 2 younger, but I had to do a lot of sitting. So basically, in helping raise the 2 younger ones, because they were, especially the youngest one, probably didn't have any recollection of, he was only 4. During the years of no antibiotics. So when my father died of pneumonia, it was sure death, just like a lot of epidemics, whooping cough and scarlet fever, and we would have to. He was a real believer not only in eating native foods all the time, but he would have a kettle of Devil's Club on the stove. Well, everybody had wood stoves, and then a kettle of some kind of root. So we would basically line up at night and have our a cup of this and a cup of that. And there are still a few remnants of our medicines, because we all take pills, and especially in certain kinds of medication, herbs can interfere. but that's basically all the people had was their own remedies. And I think I have a lot I can pass on to my children and grandchildren. And like I mentioned, my mother was a real matriarch, so that when she went to work at Mount Edgecombe, she was able to travel. She would always make a point to go visit her grandchildren if they're in college in California, or had 2 nephews in medical school, and then she would take at least 2 younger grandchildren with her to expose them to. And I feel that her influences that way has really helped with how they progressed so well in college, and I have 2 in medical, 2 who are MDs in specialty now. And for some reason, there was a lot of emphasis, including myself, in the field of health. I had 20-some years in medical records, and other nieces and nephews in public health. So, and then our daughter getting her master's in anthropology was planning to put emphasis on the medical anthropology. So, in looking at the values, you can just envision our elders. You know, Al Widmark used to say at A&B convention, we were taught not only as the founding fathers of the Alaskan Native Brotherhood, but just the way our culture is you, once an elder sat you down to talk to you, you never left until he told you he was finished. And that was part of our way of life. So there's people concerned in communities on how disruptive children could be now, and we're losing some of those values, our traditional values on respect. And I think that's one of our main characters of our culture is respect.
Alisaya King Andas Lukunana Digula Digwa Wagina Nuya Daskitalan Kilkana Digula Digwa Yahualihi I Yahualihi 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 Yahualihi